Please don't watch it alone. Like, share, and subscribe only if you dare to listen this type of stories regularly. My name is William, and I've always been a skeptic. Ghosts, spirits, and the paranormal were just stories to me, things people made up to scare themselves. But what happened to me one night changed everything. It was a few years ago, during the summer. I was staying at my grandmother's old farmhouse for the weekend, helping her with some chores. The house was tucked away in a quiet, rural area, surrounded by thick woods. It had always been a little creepy at night, but I never thought much of it. That night, after dinner, my grandmother went to bed early. I stayed up in the living room, scrolling through my phone and watching TV. The house was completely silent, except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Around midnight, I decided to head to bed. As I turned off the TV, I noticed something strange. One of the old rocking chairs in the corner of the room was slowly moving back and forth. At first, I thought it was just a draft, or maybe the old wooden floors creaking. But as I stood there watching, the rocking became more pronounced, as if someone was sitting in it, pushing it with their feet. I tried to shake off the unease that was creeping up my spine. It's just the wind, I told myself. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The windows were closed, and there was no breeze. I quickly turned off the lights and headed upstairs to my room. It couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house seemed colder than usual, and the shadows in the hallways seemed darker, more menacing. As I got into bed, I tried to brush off the unsettling experience and fall asleep. But just as I was drifting off, I heard a noise. It was faint at first, like a soft shuffling sound coming from downstairs. I listened closely, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound grew louder, more distinct. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. My mind raced. Was it my grandmother? But no, she was a light sleeper, and the footsteps were too heavy to be hers. I pulled the covers up to my chin, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, straining to hear anything in the thick silence. Suddenly, the door to my room creaked open, just a crack. My heart nearly stopped. I stared at the door, paralyzed with fear. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then I saw it, a pale, gaunt hand slowly pushing the door open further. My blood ran cold. The hand was bony, with long, thin fingers, and it was covered in dirt as if it had been clawing its way out of the ground. The door opened wider, and I saw the figure standing in the doorway. It was a man, tall and thin, with sunken eyes and hollow cheeks. His clothes were tattered and covered in dirt, and his skin was a sickly gray color. He stood there staring at me with those empty, lifeless eyes. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes away from him. He took a step into the room, his bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. Then he spoke. His voice was low and raspy, like the sound of dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This is my house." Terror surged through me. I scrambled out of bed, finally finding the strength to move. I bolted past him and ran down the stairs, not daring to look back. I could feel him behind me. I could hear his footsteps as he followed me down the hallway. I burst out of the front door and ran into the yard, my heart pounding in my ears. I looked back at the house, half expecting to see him standing in the doorway. There was no one there. The house was silent and still, just as it had always been. I didn't go back inside that night. I waited outside until dawn, too terrified to re-enter the house. When the sun finally rose, I went back in. The man was gone. It was as if he had never been there at all. I told my grandmother what had happened, and she listened quietly, her face pale. She didn't dismiss my story, and that scared me even more. She told me that before she and my grandfather had bought the house, it had belonged to a man who had disappeared one night. No one ever found out what happened to him. There were rumors that his spirit still lingered, searching for something or someone. I never stayed in that house alone again. And to this day, I can't explain what I saw. All I know is that I will never forget the terror I felt that night. And the way the man's empty eyes seemed to look right through me, as if he knew something I didn't. Some things are better left unexplained, and some places, no matter how familiar, hold secrets that are far more terrifying than any ghost story.